Hey y'all, it's me, Jen Chavez. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves this week after such an intense election cycle. I realize things are probably gonna stay intense for a while, so just as a human being that happens to host this podcast, please know that we're gonna be here for you with stories about our home and what our lives in the Pacific Northwest are like. I also realize that following the news can be overwhelming sometimes. Believe me, I get it. I need to take breaks from the news sometimes, and I am a journalist. And it's not just the content of the news and the emotions it brings up, even just the sheer amount of information that's streaming in from every direction at every moment in our fractured attention span, doom-scrolling age. Of course, that includes images. People can process an image in as little as 13 milliseconds. And that often means deciding whether to read the news story attached to it or not just as quickly. That makes the decisions we journalists make around the images we create and use to help tell a story that much more important. And the narrative and ethical choices that come along with that can sometimes get super complicated. From the Gert Boyle studio, this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Part of what we try to accomplish here at The Evergreen is helping you understand how and why we do what we do here at OPB. One part of that you don't hear about as much on the radio or in podcasts is how we tell the stories of our region in photographs. So today we're trying something a little different. The week before the election, I sat down with OPB's photo editor, Kristyna Wentz-Graff, to learn more about her work documenting the stories of the Pacific Northwest in images and the many choices she makes as a photojournalist every day, and how, no matter what she's covering, she stays focused on the fundamental humanity of the people in her photographs. Chris, thank you for being here and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, first of all, that stat that I just gave about people processing images in as little as 13 milliseconds, just how fast is that and why does it matter?
I don't know how they measure things like that. I can't even really comprehend how fast that is, but I do know that 90% of the information transmitted to our brains is visual. And we experience the world, for most of us, in a very visual way. And because of that, we're able to almost absorb information. We don't have to stop and think about it. It's just, we see something and it's just there that quick. And it taps back into all of your life experiences, everything you've ever encountered. Everything is rolled up into one neat little package. So when you see something, the information's instantly conveyed to you in a really personal way.
That's so interesting. So you talk about tapping into life experiences. Is that like our images, do they more easily pull up memories for us, like sensory memories?
Yeah, it's all in different parts of your brain. You don't think your way through what a circle looks like, but when you see it, it's just instantly there. So when you think of circle, you have the picture in your head, but you're not thinking of the verbal description of it's a line that travels in 360 degrees and connects up again. So it's just an instantaneous understanding of what you're seeing based on how you've encountered that information before.
That's so interesting. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us to talk about how you think about images as part of your work. I have a ton of questions, and I want to start by talking about elections. It's an important event, but there's not really an obvious image associated with elections. I think this is particularly true in Oregon, where there are no physical polling places. How do you cover a story like that with no obvious visuals? How are you thinking about that?
Oh, first thing I always try to do is ensure that we have parity. And it goes down even to the tiniest details. If we show one person running for a position, we have to show the other people. We want to make sure that we're not treating anybody unequally, even down to their head sizes in images. If there's two mugshots side by side, they need to be comparable. We need to be as fair as we can with the visuals, just as we do with all of our other reporting. But yeah, illustrating an election that hasn't happened, that's a lot tougher. We rely on a lot of historical things that we've shot previously. We work ahead. One of our photographers shot in Deschutes County the testing of their machinery to ensure that it was working properly.
Oh, like election machines.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
To count the votes. Yeah. We go in. We are the eyes of the community. So much of what happens for elections is on Election Day. And even though Oregon is a mail-in state, there is still voting that takes place on Election Day. People are still dropping off their ballots. And then we like to go and be the eyes of the community and see how that process is working behind the scenes. So in places where most of the public doesn't have the ability to see, we're there for them. We're showing how the ballots are being collected. We're showing how they're being processed, how they're being counted, how the signatures are being verified. And then, of course, election night is a really big night for visuals as well.
You just mentioned election nights. I'm sure you've worked a zillion of them. What are those nights like for you as a photojournalist?
They're a little bit hectic, completely unpredictable, and always exciting. I love covering election nights. In fact, I started with OPB 4 years ago, and Election Day was my first day at OPB, and that was done intentionally because I really love covering news. So it's typically the best laid plans, and then you just go from there. It depends who's winning. Gosh, there's so many factors that dictate where we go. But mainly, we want to just try and get the biggest story of the night, and be there for it. And sometimes that works according to plan, and sometimes you have to change plans very quickly.
Well, actually, I do want to ask about one specific image since we're talking about elections. There's one that I really remember of a woman dropping off her ballot at a ballot drop box, which is kind of like a fancy mailbox, and just like, she just looks so joyful to be able to be participating in this. Like, what was that moment like for you making that image?
So we never stage anything as photojournalists, and a lot of my work is building quick relationships with people and then trying to predict what they're going to do. So I had staked out this ballot drop box in Multnomah County, and it was part of my daily coverage, and she was fantastic. She walked up, and I just happened to be in position and waiting, and she kissed her ballot for good luck and then dropped it in, and it was really exciting. The light, it was beautiful, and it had a very hopeful feeling to it. And I was just lucky enough to be able to be there and then talk to her afterwards about why she was kissing her ballot for luck and what she was hoping for. It's those kind of moments that make me really love my job. I get to be not only the eyes of the community, but I get a firsthand seat to see the amazing ways that people move through their lives, through great times, through hard times. I'm just really fascinated at how they handle every situation, and I'm so inspired by it. So I've never thought about kissing my ballot before I dropped it in a box, but every time I do submit my ballot, I think of her.
Oh, I love that. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about another thing that often comes up in our journalism here in the Pacific Northwest, which is protest. There have been a lot of protests in Portland over the years. That's where our headquarters are based, including over 100 days in 2020. I know that some anarchist protesters or other leftist protesters wear masks at protests and specifically do not want their faces photographed. And I think the same is sometimes true for far-right protesters. How has that, people's strong desire not to be photographed, affected your work taking photographs, making images during protests?
I think communities are stronger when we understand all the people that are in our community. So I feel really strongly about showing these protests And they definitely do not want to be photographed, even when their faces are covered, even when they're unidentifiable, because they see media as having a role to play in the greater issues that they're protesting against. It's dangerous work, and it's unsettling. It's really hard to make images that people can connect with. And it's been actually one of the most challenging things I've ever covered in my career. It's quite frustrating because I see there's a lot of amazing stories, and I want to be able to share those with the community. And what you end up being able to photograph is just destruction or very obvious things that are happening, instead of the stories behind why they're doing that, the stories behind how they feel when we're out on the streets at night in protests. All of that message is lost.
You know, last spring there were protests at colleges and universities all over the country against the war in Gaza. I know you spent a lot of time at Portland State University. There was a library that was occupied by student protesters. And I'm very interested in what it took and what you did to build trust with those protesters to be able to get inside of that library.
I just showed up every day. I just was there from the very beginning. I don't think they trusted me. I don't think they trust any media, but they were familiar with me. They saw me every day. I came to see what was happening. I was there in the morning. I was there at night. And I wasn't aligned with any specific cause. I was a witness. And they knew that was my aim, to witness whatever was happening. After they occupied the library, definitely they weren't allowing media in, and they kept talking about all the things that they were doing in the beginning to support the community and why they thought this was an important thing to do. And I said, well, if you don't show it, no one will ever know. And so I just kept lobbying to be able to go in and show it. So I think it was just showing up every day. And they knew that I wasn't media that was parachuting in to just show the chaos, that I had been there from the beginning. And I think that's really important for people during protests to know who the people are that are trying to get the whole story and not just the big hot mess that attracts a lot of photographers.
And obviously, the war in Gaza brings up a lot of intense emotions. I know it does for me. I don't want to make assumptions, but perhaps it does for you too, and for many people in our audience. And at these protests, there are a lot of slogans, there are a lot of signs, there are a lot of strong visual expression of these strong emotions. How do you decide what to show in those cases?
Well, people are always the stories, and while they might have interesting signs and slogans, the people are the story. And so I work really hard to try and represent both sides. Sometimes it's hard to find the other side, but I can usually find them somewhere. And then working really slow and deliberately, talking to people about their experience. Why are they here? In those situations, I'm looking for the emotion, because it is such an intense thing, and the emotion is what's going to tell the story.
Coming up after a break, covering tough issues like addiction and homelessness with care, finding the balance between trauma and joy, and using images as a vehicle for human connection. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you like what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll provide you with something new and interesting to think about every Monday morning. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo, where you'll find plenty of photographs by Wentz-Graff and much, much more about what we at Team Evergreen and all our friends at OPB are up to. And remember, this episode about OPB's visual journalism and all the great reporting and storytelling you hear about on this show is made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. Support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And now, back to the show. Recently, we talked to Conrad Wilson and Troy Brennelson, two OPB reporters, about their coverage of deflection. That is the way counties recently have started handling addiction, public drug use. Some counties putting people into the criminal justice system, some people putting them into treatment. And this is not the first time that you have accompanied Conrad on stories like these. I remember we talked to Conrad also last winter about his story about Measure 110. And during that story, he witnessed someone overdosing in the street and had to make a choice about whether to include the audio of that in his story. You, of course, were making choices about images. When you are on shoots like this, what kind of things are going through your mind about the choices you're making about what to photograph?
Well, first and foremost, it's really important to represent the person, place, or experience as truthfully and honestly as I can. And I have to do that no matter how graphic or difficult or unpleasant it might be to look at. And photojournalists, we run towards the challenging things. And cases like with Conrad, when we came up on the person who had overdosed, I knew it was a really, really important moment. And so I kind of switch into autopilot, and I just don't want to screw it up. I just want to tell the story as clearly and truthfully as I can. But it's also hard because that's somebody's kid. That's somebody's brother. But I try to put my thoughts about that to the back and remain as unjudgmental as I can and really just drill down and focus on what's actually happening in front of me. In my head, I'm thinking about, can we show this person's face? Do I need to shoot this from a different angle? What type, should I switch on a different lens? Am I in the way of the emergency responders? Am I staying out of their way? Where's Conrad? What's he doing? My brain gets incredibly quiet, but it's also just spinning, trying to think about all the possible things that I need to be covering. I'm just afraid of not telling the story that I'm given the chance to tell. Mm-hmm. And that was such an important moment in this person's life. It's important for, I think, our community to see what kinds of conditions people are living under, what the police are dealing with every day. It's important to show it, to be able to get a call to action and to hold people accountable. Yeah, I just really try to see people and be present because life is all about the connections of other people in our community. And I think helping us all connect to one another, it means everything to me. I just want people to be able to look at other people and understand more. When I see a situation like that, I come home and it makes the fact that I forgot to take out the garbage not such a big deal. It puts things into perspective. With Conrad, we talked about it for hours. We were texting and talking to each other on the phone. And I couldn't look at the pictures for about a week. I didn't want to look at them. When I did start to look at them, because I had shot it and it was such an impactful moment, I needed to make sure that I was thinking about what my journalistic purpose was and showing those images. And then I start thinking about the ethics involved. Main thing is to do no harm for other people or to do as little harm as possible. And what was my purpose in showing this to the community? What could happen to the person who was depicted? So I reached out to some people that I really trust at ProPublica, their editing counterparts, and at NPR, just to get an idea of whether or not the image translated. I knew how it felt because I was there, but I needed to make sure that was conveyed in 2D in a picture. I think it's important not to turn away from these hard realities, but there's a way to do it where it respects the person in it, because obviously they can't give consent at that moment. Mm-hmm. And we did work to try and get consent from him afterwards.
And one image that you made more recently on a reporting trip with Conrad Wilson about how deflection and enforcement of drug policy is carrying out in the streets of Multnomah County, you made an image of a woman who was facing arrest over possession of drug use. And looking at it right now, we don't see her face. She's seated on the curb with her hands tied behind her back. What were you thinking about when you were in the process of making this image?
It was obviously, if not the worst day in her life, one of her very difficult days in her life. And I didn't want to make it any more challenging, but I also have a responsibility to faithfully document what I see. I made the choice to use images that didn't show her face because I'm thinking about potential harm for this person. And because she chose to explore deflection, there's a likely possibility that she'd go to treatment. And it's a fragile time when people go through treatment. And I was very aware of the potential for additional harm to this person. Let's say if an employer might see her face. So I'm thinking about those kind of things. I'm typically trying to figure out if there's another way that I can convey the same kind of information while meeting my ethical concerns. And in this case, it was being able to photograph her from behind. The scene and the context and the whole scene was really what was important in that moment. The fact that the police officer was staring at his phone, waiting for 30 minutes to see if the deflection folks would come. So in some ways, she stands in for all of the people who've experienced or will experience deflection in Oregon.
A question is in my mind from something that you said before, which is that you try to remove any judgment that you might have as a human being. In what ways do judgments show up that you have to actively resist? You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. It shows up in all types of ways that there's all types of subtle messaging and visuals. For example, your proximity to someone can signal whether you're afraid of them or you're really comfortable with them. If I'm shooting with a wide-angle lens and I'm right in somebody's space, right, you know that the photographer has to be really comfortable with who they're photographing. But if it's somebody I'm concerned about, I may make a different lens choice and be farther away. If I photograph somebody from below, it can imply that I think they're powerful. If I photograph them from above, it can imply that I feel that they are less powerful. So there's all this subtle messaging. We are surrounded by it every day. And we pick up cues from that we're not even aware of. And so when I am actively thinking of a bias, it will come out in the way that I approach a situation and the way that I photograph it. Maybe in their expressions that I'm focused on. Or in this situation, I could have focused more on the police aspect if I had judgment about whether I thought the people were doing something right or wrong. For most people that I meet, I'm more interested in what's happening and how they're handling it than making a statement about what they're doing.
Obviously, homelessness has been in the news a lot recently. I know that you have covered issues dealing with housing and homelessness and have photographed unhoused people in our region before. What kind of images are you thinking about in terms of what images you're choosing to accompany stories about homelessness?
This is really similar to what we were just talking about in terms of bias. Whenever I go into these situations, I try to have no preconceived notions. I've met people who are unhoused who made the choice to be unhoused. I've met people who it's a situation they never thought they'd be in and don't want to be in. So my assumptions about what may or may not have led to someone being unhoused, they have no place in my work because everyone's experience is just one experience. So what I really work to do is talk to people directly when I can. I try not to make anyone the poster child of houselessness or being unhoused. Their experience is representative of their experience only. But I do think it's important to show because it speaks to an issue that's impacted Portland significantly. And I think it's important that we don't hide from things that are hard. And there's actually a lot of beauty in some of those situations too. I see strength and resilience. It's not always just a negative. There's a lot of amazing stories that can be told. I have this little side project where I often see the most touching signs of home in some of these camps. An example would be last year, someone had found a tree and some ornaments and had decorated their tent. Another person had built a shoe rack outside of their, it wasn't exactly a tent, but it was kind of a grouping of tarps. And their shoes were lined up on this rack perfectly, much like my shoe rack looks when I come in the front door of my house. I've seen people hang pictures on trees around their camps. It's amazing to me how people create a sense of home, even maybe not in a place that I would define as home. So I'm fascinated by the people, how they deal with everything. Everybody handles it so different. And I'm a pack rat. I want to take a little bit home of everyone that I meet. And I get to do that when I make their photo.
How do you balance images of tragedy and trauma with images of joy and community? Because I do think that, like you talk about, there is strength, there is resilience, there is beauty to be found. How do you think about finding that balance for the people viewing these photos, but also for the subjects of the photos?
Yeah, I think you have to be really present. You have to be really open to whatever you see, but also to whatever you feel. And so a lot of times when I get to these situations, it doesn't matter if it's a community fair or a funeral. I usually stand still for about 15 minutes and just soak up the environment. And if you're looking for sadness, you'll find it. And if you're looking for happiness, you'll find it. And if you're looking for joy, you'll find it. So the key is to not look for all those things, but just to see them as a whole and see all these pieces as part of a greater whole. So that's when I'm thinking about covering something that might seem like a funeral, might seem really sad to someone, but there's also seeing how people handle it just restores my faith in people. I see how they comfort one another, how somebody might reach for someone else's hand and hold it, how their fingers linger on the casket. There's signs that connect, or I'm looking for ways to help people connect more than telling a specific aspect of a story. And I think those are such universal behaviors that it's easy to balance trauma with joy when you're looking for connection. Because the connection is what unites us. Can I tell you a quick story?
Yes, please.
Okay. A young woman that I met, she was 20. Her name was Kristyna. And we started to do a story about, this is at another place I worked, we started to do a story about wives who sent over care packages to their loved ones who were overseas in the military. So I met her. She was baking cookies and doing all these things to send a care package to Ricky, her husband of 10 months. And I was supposed to go to Iraq and about the time that Ricky would get the package, and I was going to meet up with him when he opened the package. Turns out the package never arrived, and I didn't get to go to Iraq. The reporter did, but Ricky was killed in an IED. And so I called Kristen up and said, I know this wasn't the story we talked about doing, but could I come be with you? I would like to show what you're experiencing because people all over the country are experiencing this. So could I come wait with you until Ricky's body comes back? That sounds like a horribly depressing story. And it was incredibly challenging because it was really hard to witness. But it was also one of the most formative stories of my career because she allowed me to be with her, and I witnessed all the ranges of things. So many people from across the country wrote letters to the stranger. It was beautiful and tragic and all the things in between. So I think that we have to make sure that when we're documenting something, it's not one-dimensional. It's not just sad. It's not just happy. It's not just stressful, whatever, fill in the blank. We're multi-dimensional creatures we can hold all those feelings at the same time. And it's my job to try and show all of that in its complexity. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not, but I'm always trying.
Why do you do this work? Why do you feel called towards this work?
I think one important thing about photojournalism is it is a male-dominated career. About 85% of photojournalists are male. I think it's really important to have photographers from a wide range of viewpoints because we are all able to work in different communities in different ways. There's places that I can get access to because I'm a woman. Just like with other formats of reporting, it's essential that we have people from a wide range of experiences, lifestyles, cultures, genders that do this kind of work because this is the historical record of our time. And if those communities are not represented in the historical record, then they're lost. And when we look back 10 years, 15, 20 years, it's important that we see all the richness that's from our community. And that takes a lot of different voices to represent.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today.
Thanks. It was a great conversation.
Kristyna Wentz-Graff is OPB's photo editor. You can find many examples of her visual journalism, including a selection of photographs we discussed in this episode at opb.org. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Sage Van Wing produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Nolene Silva engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Julie Sabatier. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. If you have a question for us, please reach out. Email theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Take care of yourselves, my friends. I'll catch you later.